Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to College English 103, Section 5005, Composition 1 with you. And with me, Mr. Fowler, your inimitable host and instructor, back again for week 9. And I've got our course syllabus pulled up here for you to take a look at as a point of refresher. Okay, as you can see, we are in week 9, which means for this week, you should have done the following. You should have read our trusty text, Ready Player One, specifically chapters 20 through 24. Now, some of you may be ahead of that reading schedule, and I, by all means, endorse your readership, and I encourage you to continue reading ahead. I think it'll only make things easier for you. But if you find the book to be a drag, or you're just trying to read along so that it doesn't become, a chore, at least having read up through 24 for this week would be ideal. Hey, look at that. You don't want it to be a chore, so read up to chapter 24. It rhymes. I'm a poet and I didn't know it, though my feet would show it because they're Longfellows. Anyway. That also means you have 2 items to take care of before we go on spring break. So next week, even though we're virtual, during week 10, which is roughly the 22nd to the 25th, that's still technically spring break. So you're not responsible for anything next week. But that's just fine because that'll give me a little extra time to grade any and all of your analyses drafts, the drafts of your analysis or second essay project, which are due this Friday by 11:59 p.m. And it will also give you some time to respond to the Friday discussion number 7 that's coming up this week. Okay, so real quick look at how we are going to wrap this project up. We're going to look for the analysis draft this Friday. Then you'll have spring break off. Then when we come back, it's sort of a strange week, right? We start back on the 29th, and then we're going to leave. Notice I say the 29th through the 31st. Well, what happened to Friday? Obviously, that's observed as Good Friday. For those of you who observe that holiday, there is no class that day. So I'm not asking you to submit anything. Ideally, I think this would be a good time to turn in your final draft, but I forgot when I was observing the dates there that was not just a random April Fool's Day. It is a Good Friday. Consequently, I'll probably roll that back. I'll give you an extra day. Then that would be the 2nd, in which you can turn in the draft. Now, what if you don't really want to do that? What if you need to keep that day? Because into that Friday, you've got Easter coming up. So that's a difficult time to turn in a paper. But the thing that, again, throws us here is spring break. So if you want to submit this and start working on the revision during spring break, that wouldn't hurt my feelings at all. But I do want to honor the time that was set aside for you for spring break. I don't know how many of you are going to take advantage of that holiday, but that's something that does give us a little bit of wiggle room, and maybe we'll think about that in planning ahead for week 11 and how you want to handle that holiday weekend or that weekend off, as opposed to just the spring break, which has no other connotations. So don't be shy about reaching out to me to see if I can facilitate something for you. So that's the first thing I wanted to stop and take a look at. Generally speaking, I did want to say, pop and say hello. I've got my green on, right? Because we won't be meeting on Wednesday, which is the actual St. Patrick's Day. I mean, I'll be available, but I thought I'd throw my festive green on just in case you wanted to check to see whether or not I was mindful of what's going on in the real world. Um, but nevertheless, folks, we find the Ides of March upon us, which means time is moving relatively quickly into the future. Okay? And as such, we have quite a few things to take care of. The first of which is this week's essay assignment, the analysis assignment, which is due again by Friday. If you've been keeping track of the notes and the notifications in the course, then you know that we've been working toward this project and describing it for the last several weeks. So today I'm just going to spit off to you in terms of three different ideas, or three concepts. Number one, we're going to look at another student review, and I'm going to use that student review paper to set up a discussion of number two, how to use the library resources here at KISH if you want to find a defining source for your paper. Remember, you have to have just one source for this paper of 850 pages, just one. It could be personal, but for those of you who want to get a little bit more practice with something practical, practice with something more, how should I say this, more typical of a college English course, you may want to consult an official source or citation, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And then, of course, third, as always, we're going to take you through the notes for chapters 20 through 24 in Ready Player One, just to make sure that you've been reading, that you're kept up with the reading assignments, and maybe to delve deeper into the text in case you have questions or concerns. So that's our basic agenda for today. Right? Let's start with that paper. Save this real quick. And let's see here. Did I forget to bring it up? Oh, okay. Maybe I did. Oops. Pardon me while I work through this for a moment. All right. So, see if I can share. There it is. All right, back to life. So again, just a quick check. Notice that this is from almost, a year ago, and that it's not quite perfect. 600 words as opposed to an essay of 850. So even though this essay is not perfect, I like to show an example of how you can use a topic from the book as the spring point for a new topic. This time the student selected the Rubik's Cube, and she writes that the decade of the 1980s, also known as the Golden Age, I don't remember that ever being called the Golden Age, was a very popular time period. The music industry was thriving, movies along with television shows were taking off, and the fashion pieces were eye-catching from a mile away. It's no doubt that to this day it is very well remembered by many. especially people from my generation whose parents were born during the unforgettable era. I like that she segues into that and makes a point of bringing up the fact that her parents lived during the 80s and that they may be a source for a direct reference. This is especially true, or rather, especially for people from my generation whose parents were born during the unforgettable era. The 80s bring back nostalgic feelings to everyone, even if you were not alive during that time. I even find myself fascinated by all the old music. For this assignment, though, I've selected an artifact, a toy known as the Rubik's Cube. This toy should be already be pictured in your mind simply because everyone should know what it is. That is how popular it is, even 40 years later. And I said, you're missing a couple of commas here that would have really cleared things up. And she begins with a description. Now, one of the things that I would have suggested she improve upon is building this into the information in the introduction, right? So she doesn't have specific criteria that you could use to identify how she's going to move forward in time with her analysis. The Rubik's Cube, originally called the Magic Cube, was invented in 1974 by Erno Rubik, but was not popular in America until 1980. So that's a valid point to make. Three-dimensional 3x3 cube fascinating people across. Toys like a puzzle, and at times looks nearly impossible to solve, but it is indeed possible. The puzzle-like cube intrigues people of all ages. Not even I figure out how to solve it. It's quite impressive watching someone solve Rubik's Cube over time. So that's weird, and make it look so easy, right? So intriguing people of all ages. I haven't even solved it, but it is impressive to watch it being solved. That's a little clunky. It could have been handled a lot better, and a clear, distinct linkage is missing. In no way, shape, or form does this toy benefit in everyday life. But it definitely helps when it comes to passing time or if you're feeling up a mentally stimulating challenge. It's interesting because they say that because later on they note that Erno Rubik was actually a physics instructor, an architectural designer who created a puzzle for his students. So to say that it has, it doesn't benefit anyone in everyday life, I'm not sure that's a claim that they can make that's going to stand under sturdy analysis. The shape and form of the original Rubik's Cube has since evolved into a much more complex shape and size. The company Rubik's Brand Limited is responsible for creating them and has really gone above and beyond to keep the 80s toy sparking today. Competitions and world records have been set for this complex toy. And then as I note here, despite the Rubik's Cube being popular, I chose their artifact simply because it was in one of the scenes in the film of Ready Player One. And I note here that not only is it mentioned in the film, but it's mentioned in the book as part of the design grid for the entire Oasis. And they cite some instances from the film and so on and so forth. And then they say, in conclusion, the simple yet complex artifact will continue to thrive throughout time due to its many forms it's developed. It is a small piece from the golden ages that will continue to travel in time with people across the world. It even gets 5 seconds of fame in the film. That is all it takes to catch an individual's eye. Now, I will have to say that while the paper is too terse and it doesn't quite make the limits, it doesn't quite live up to the analysis time of 800 words. This is not a bad conclusion. It's short. It's only 3 sentences. I think it's actually 4. Excuse me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you might be asking at this point, well, wow, Mr. Power, if this isn't so done very well, and the other one that you shared with us earlier is, why did you even bother to show us this? Well, there are a couple. Right? You can learn something from a paper, even if it's not a particularly well done paper. So one of the things that jumps out at me is that they do establish some criteria. Right? So if we go, if we look backward here and looking at a paper like this, imagining, for example, if it were a draft. One of the things that would have been really good to pump this paper up, or that would have been very helpful, would have been pausing long enough to talk about how the Rubik's Cube is used not only in the film adaptation, which is good, but how it was used in the book and how it was deemed such an important 80s artifact that it had to be included and was actually part of the design scope of how the Oasis was formed in a three-dimensional space. They also take time to, in this paragraph, to explain that it can be solved. And here, they could have followed up on their parents' identification of that object and dropped in a significant, meaningful quotation, which really would have helped this paper and bulked up its material content. So even putting in a passage from this writer's parents about their interactions with Rubik's Cube would have been a fascinating way to enhance our understanding as readers of how it was a phenomenon in that period. The other thing that you could have done is you could have gone to an outside source, which we're going to take a look at here in just a few minutes, to explore how the Rubik's Cube evolved and give perhaps some examples of the manuals that were written about how to solve the Rubik's Cube and how those manuals actually set up the young man who figured out the puzzle and the way to solve it multiple times. And he was actually able to sell guidebooks that explain how to defeat the Rubik's Cube puzzle. And that was really interesting. A whole side, story that crops up in relationship to this object. And then, it was called the originally the Imagined Cube. So a little bit more about Erno Rubik and why he created the cube would have helped to build up this element, this criterion, if you will, about what made this such an iconic 80s item. And then forecasting those things in the introduction, or perhaps adding even a paragraph after this long introduction that explained what those key criteria were going to be, would have really helped to guide the readers throughout the remainder of the essay. So even in an essay that's less than perfect, shall we say, there is something to be learned. There's something valuable that we can pull out of a reading experience like this and sort of analyze. We might find ourselves, you as a writer, myself as one of your editors, in the same situation where you've got a book that's up for debate, or a topic that you're writing about, a movie, a film, something of that nature that's iconic to this project, and writing everything you want to say and coming up with 600 words. Right? What do we do? How do we expand? How do we add to the context in a way that's just not repetitive? Well, we've explored the ways in which we could do that very thing. Go back, focus on key criteria, find a source, or find a personal source that you could use as a reference to bring in some context before moving on to the conclusion. And in the conclusion, make sure that you flesh that out too, using that pyramid shape. You start with the most specific piece, restating the pieces, and then you expand, right, into the end by re-evaluating the criteria you listed in the introduction, right? Because the introduction is the opposite, right? The introduction is the funnel. You start very broad, talking about the topic, narrow it to specific criteria in this case that you're going to use to analyze it, ending in a thesis. Explain why Rubik's Cube, for example, was such an iconic piece of 80s. That would be a way to be more successful in creating a good, thorough look at a project like this. Okay, so that's good practice for us all to get into. And a nice way to sort of build in some supports in case there's an emergency to speak as you're ready. All right, now I'm going to go back to share screen for a minute. So what does this look like? Well, let's see if I can do the share screen here. There we go. So here we go. We're at the Kishwaukee College. And if I have done this before, please bear with me. Let's say you're ready to do a little work on this project and you need some resources. Well, the first thing you're going to do is use what's called the burger menu. I guess because it looks like Burger Time. If you've ever played that video game and the stacks of burgers that you create. But they call it a burger. I don't know why they call it that. It's weird, but that's what they call it. So if you hover over the burger menu, you'll get a whole list of items revealed here at the side. You're interested in the 7th link down here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, I guess it's the 6th link now. They changed them. The 6th link, student resources. Click on that and you get a new drop down menu. And now let's go down 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Library. Now the library gives us several links. And all you have to do to get to the primary links that we're going to use today is just scroll down under announcements and look for this green text called popular places. And the first one that you may want to search is the library smart search. The difficulty with the library smart search right now is that with COVID, you're not going to be able to get in and get at those physical texts or magazines or periodicals. So you're going to have to request a pickup in which you go to the college and pick that material up yourselves. Now, one of the nice things, though, is that you don't have to even do that because you have EBSCOhost and opposing viewpoints available. You also have several links here for citation help if you need a refresher course on how to format your papers in MLA format. But let's go to EBSCOhost for right now. While it's taking a while, I'll just say that we're going to stay with the example of the Rubik's Cube to facilitate a subject for the example that we're going to use. So for example, this is like any kind of search database that you can use, whether it's Google Scholar, pretty much any sort of database that you've ever used works in a very similar way to EBSCOhost. One thing though that I would do just to select and keep your time to your time usage to a maximum, I would limit your results to a scholarly journal Now, scholarly or peer-reviewed journals are the best possible resource because they're expertly written articles that are edited and curated by other experts in the same field. So you've got people writing in physics, and when they write into a physics journal, that information is cross-checked and analyzed with other physicists, and then it's published. So you're getting the best of the best when you check in with a peer-reviewed journal. Also, you probably want to check full text online available. Now we're going to scroll back up to the top, and we're going to put in Rubik Cube. And we're just going to do a basic search. Now, if I wanted to add information that's going to include Erno Rubik, be careful with your Boolean phrases, because with a Boolean phrase, you're going to only get results that include both Rubik's Cube and Erno Rubik. If you switch that to or, you're going to expand the search. So you're going to look for anything that's got Rubik's Cube in it or Erno Rubik. So all those results are going to come. Or if you click not, you're going to look for things that are just talking about the Rubik's Cube, but not Erno Rubik, which would be odd for this particular choice, but I just want you to know what your Boolean phrases are doing. All right, now let's click search. Let's just see what Erno Rubik comes up with. Okay, not bad. 764 results. Usually initial results can be into the thousands. So if you had 2 or 3 hours to set aside, you could do quite a bit of research here looking into the Rubik's Cube. Now, we're going to limit it a little bit more because we're going to change the publication. It's often said that in research, you shouldn't use a source that's less than 10 years old. So 10 years would be 2001, right? Or actually 2011, let's try that. So that's 10 years. So we're going to limit the publication date, and it's going to update the results. Hopefully it won't, yeah. Okay, 402. It didn't make a huge dent, but it did restrict. Now, some people might suggest even more stringent example. So they might say you don't want to go to anything less than 6 years. So what would that be? 2015. Is that right? Let's see if that changes. The core number to remember is 10. If it's more than 10 years old, it might be an out-of-date resource. And yeah, that was a significant change. And just from 10 years to 6 years, we're down at 252. One good solid afternoon research would probably allow you to look at least every single option on this page, but I don't expect you to do either of that. Okay, probably the first, I don't know, 6 or 7 pages are going to give you the core details that you need in your paper results. Treatment strategies for new coronavirus. Rubik's Cube solved. Maybe. Children adopt the traits of characters narrative. No. Children adopt the traits of characters narrative. Not going to do that. Here's a good example, maybe, but it's in Spanish. So if you don't have access to that as a secondary or primary language, I'd probably avoid that. Let's see. Lots of things about education. Here's kind of an interesting one, especially in context of our text. Considerations for comparing a video game AI agents to humans, artificial intelligence agents to humans. But generally, we're looking at the first 30 results out of 252. And I haven't seen a whole lot of interesting ideas. But here's one finally, 29. Problems for metagrobiologists. Metagrobiologists. Oof, that's a mouthful. A collection of puzzles with real mathematical, logical, or scientific content. Maybe, it's only a page long. So at that rate, you might as well take a look at it and see if the review is anything that's worthwhile. To the larger public, Singh-Nash is best known for his early work on Rubik's Cube, published first in Mathematical Analysis in '79, as a report at South Bank, later as a book. He introduced the notation system for Rubik's Cube that was widely adopted. To historians of mathematics and fellow metagrobiologists who appreciate those comprehensive source of recreational problems. Okay, well, interesting. Maybe. Don't know that it's exactly what we would want. Let's check the next page. And as we go on here to the second listing, you can find that this really isn't getting us the result we want. So when it doesn't do that, you might want to go back and say, and use your 1980s culture. Let's see what those results turn out. Again, this is a good example because it's not perfect. And it told us no results were found. Okay, so let's do Erno Rubik. And Rubik's Cube. And let's search. Mathematical art. Look at that. Just one. Wow. Interesting. Pages 28 to 32, 5 pages. That might be an interesting article. Let's take a look at the HTML full text. We'll pull this up as an example. And let's see. A work of art is a construction called into being by artists who have felt compelled to communicate his ideas to his fellow human beings. A research mathematician plays with ideas, which he puts together into what may vaguely be called structure, in ways possibly quite similar to the ways the artist, the mathematician, makes constructions. In this sense, he's also an artist. The words of a pioneering educator, mathematician, philosopher, psychologist, and poet, Zoltan Dienz, suggested that the focus of the column for our mathematical pleasure might be an art. Is that possible? So they go on and talk about this idea, but this seems like it's a little bit heavy, and we're just looking for sort of casual research. So in this case, we'll go back to the drawing board. But while we're here, let's say we did find something particularly interesting. Do note over in the right-hand column here that these tools can help you. You can add it to the folder in case you want to go back to this. You could email a copy to yourself as a reminder that it exists. But look at this. You can also cite. Let's say, for an example, you did want to cite this. The first thing you have to do is find the MLA. I'll pause for a minute for those of you who are in the sciences to point out that this also includes a reference to APA, but we're going to use MLA. Look at that. You've got the link right there that you can copy and paste and put right in your works cited. I know. Isn't that nice? But unfortunately, we probably don't want to cite this particular example. So let's go back and change the years and make it 2011. And let's just see if we can bring up any more results. Revisited and remixed. Creative variations and twisting knobs. Ability, puzzles, maze puzzles, computer games. Let's check out this one. Tech trends, linking research and practice to improve learning. This might be a good topic. 4 pages. Let's look at the, let's see if there's a, no, nothing listed here, so we're going to have to go ahead and read it. PDF full text on this one, so it's going to have to open another page, but that's okay. Creative people, be they artists or authors, scientists, are often asked where their ideas come from. Stephen King, in his book On Writing, implied that his ideas came from a small, bloodthirsty elf who lives in a dark hole under his desk. His son, Joe Hill, an accomplished author of his own right, offers a similar tongue-in-cheek response, suggesting that his ideas come from Schenectady, specifically from a mom and pop store in 147. As an aside, more of these stories of inspiration are found here. In our previous November 2013 article in the series on creativity, we argued that creativity is not a magical process, but emerges from combining pre-existing ideas and concepts in unique and novel ways. Interesting. I'm going to pause there. Let's see. Double movers. Here's the Rubik's Cube. Variants and variations. Consider, for instance, Rubik's Cube. Imagine your task of creating other puzzles based on a Rubik's Cube. What are some knobs that you can tweak to generate variations of cube? One set of obvious variations changing the structure. Okay, interesting. But it doesn't really give us a lot of, there it is. That's something we can use. An obvious challenge to the argument we have developed so far is that none of these variations demonstrate real creativity. Real creativity, that critically argue, belongs to Erno Griffith, who came up with the Rubik's Cube in the first place. Surely his original puzzles, so original in payment structure and approach to method of play, was a true example of creative inspiration. Everyone else was just twisting and copying his idea. There's a really good example of a quote that you can use from a reputable, published piece of material that you can use to enhance your analysis of a topic like Rubik's Cube. It took us quite a while. We had to go down some dark alleys that did lead us to what we wanted. But again, we're here. We're in the tool faction. We can click on the cite button, and we can select the MLA version and copy and paste that into a Word document, and we're ready to go. So, as you can see, there are a plethora of resources that you can use, and that you might have to delve through in order to find a good piece of material to use for your essay. But that's okay. That's part of the process that this week's writing and crafting will have to include. Now, stick with me. I want to show you one other resource. All right, so I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to go back to the library homepage. And I'm going to show you opposing viewpoints. Opposing viewpoints may offer you some interesting materials for this paper, but more to the point, for your next project, the argumentative paper, you may find that this is a very appealing place to start that educational process. So Gale and context can kind of give you some information about various topics at play. If we stick with the idea of Rubik's Cube, let's try the right stuff. Rubik's Cube. I'm going to guess you probably won't have too many results. Well, 20, actually quite a bit. One video about Rubik's Cube, a couple of images, 29 magazine articles, and again, you can select full text documents. And it didn't change. You still have all 29. A robot versus the Rubik's Cube from 2019. 1 minute, 36.39 seconds. Possessed by the Cube from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Great source. That's from 2007, though. A little out of our date range, but not terrible, especially if it facilitates your needs. New York Times up front. 4.904, 3.25, probably. It's a 33-word article, brief piece, probably telling us the world record for the cube. This is very interesting, though. The Comeback Cube. So if you click on Comeback Cube, it's going to give you a link to this article, which is going to talk about a brief resurgence in the popularity of the Rubik's Cube. It's real short. You can read the whole thing right here. And then you've got, again, the citation information. Here's the NLA 8th edition source citation. Okay, it's all preset for you. You've got it there, and you've got the text right here you want to read. So, again, another great source that you can use just to sort of enhance your opportunities to find a decent source about a potential topic. Okay. So that leads us to today's PowerPoints. So here we go. We have Parzival here in Ready Player One, in homage to the Steve McQueen film Bullets. I always like these little faux movie posters. And just to keep you up to date, help you ground yourself and where you were at previously, Parzival has entered a low point in his quest for holiday fig. After achieving a modicum of fame and wealth, after winning the Copper Key, clearing the Associated Gate, and completing the first challenges, Wade is contacted by IOI. They want to recruit him, but Wade rejects their offer, and in return, they blow up his house, killing everyone, or a lot of people in the stacks, including everyone in his family. And the first thing he does is try to assemble another group of gunshots. And he says, I'm going to we should help each other. We should work together against IOI, but they reject his offer. Then things go from bad to worse. Daito and Shoto reject his offer. Then Artemis leaves until it's finally down to just Wade and just H. he tries to tell Artemis how he feels to kind of bring her back into the fold, but she out and out rejects him and choosing rather to focus on the contest itself. She says that you don't live in the real world, you live inside of an illusion. And Wade begins to think that she may be right. He finds himself alone, depressed, and overweight as we begin this next passage. And we jump ahead in time 6 months for level 2, chapter 20 pixel. The first thing that occupies a significant portion of this chapter is the idea about politics and helps give some context to the reality of Dystopia 2045, where Wade explains that he didn't bother to vote in the US elections because he didn't see the point. The once great country into which I'd been born resembled its former self. It didn't matter who was in charge because those people were basically rearranging deck chairs on Titanic and everybody knew it. So one boss is the same as the old boss. Oops, sorry. However, there are Oasis elections, and he did take time to vote in those because their outcomes affected him. At least in his opinion, they actually affected him. And he said, like most countries have voted to re-elect Cory Doctorow, who is a British blogger and video game designer, and Will Wheaton, who is sort of an ambassador, actor and former star of Star Trek. He's kind of an ambassador to all things sort of nerd culture, which I thought was interesting. In a sort of synergistic bit of happenstance, Will Wheaton actually went on to narrate the official audio book of Ready for It. There you go. Parzival begins to sell some commercial time to his previous sponsors for his own specific YouTube channel, which is called Parzival TV. It's called a POV channel in the book. I don't know if they wanted to avoid YouTube or something like that, but it's basically. And we know that modern day, contemporary, I shouldn't say modern day, but contemporary YouTubers do this very thing. They earn capital on the side as a side hustle. So, you know, there's some bearing in reality here. And he also knows that Artemis, in the meantime, also hard up for some cash, perhaps, started a clothing line for full-figured female avatars under the label Artemis. Going back to the idea of Linden dollars, profitability of digital download products, which cost very little to make, but can reap the creator numerous real-world dollars, real-world rewards. It might be a potential paper topic or discussion topic for our final project. So keep that in mind. We also find out that things don't improve with Wade's friends. He writes that he tried to reconnect with H after Artemis had dumped him, but things weren't the same. We'd grown apart, and Wade admits that it was his fault. I could tell he no longer trusted me, and while I'd been off obsessing over her, it seemed H had become obsessed with being the first gunter to find the Jade Key. I hadn't spoken to him in almost a month. And then in less than 6 months, I managed to wreck both of my closest friends. However, he also makes some new friends. He managed to form a tenuous relationship with Daito and Shoto. The three of us teamed up to complete an extended quest in Sector 22 called Shadowei Uturaman on the planet Tokasaki. And from the Western world, we know this is mostly for Ultraman. The quest was a recreation of the Ultraman TV series, which had aired from 66 to 67 in Japanese television. But we get some heavy foreshadowing. Even though the quest takes them quite some time, an entire week according to Wade, they do clear all 39 levels and complete the quest. As we stepped out of the quest gate, though, our avatars were awarded a huge amount of experience points and several thousand credits. But the real prize was an incredibly rare artifact, the Beta capsule that the same central character Hayata uses to become Ultraman. And he says you two, meaning Daito and Shoto, should keep the Beta capsule because Ultraman is Japan's greatest. And this power belongs in Japanese. It's kind of an interesting concept. Tries to build a bridge here in a respectful way. But even though Wade has this alternate identity of Bryce Lynch, even though he's spelling in for commercial time on a YouTube channel, he's always hard up for cash. Specifically, he's got some real world bills like rent, food, water, but he also needs to pay his electricity bill to connect to the Oasis and repair his heart. His Oasis world bills are a little bit more creative. Spaceship repairs, teleportation fees, power cells, ammunition, all that kind of thing. So again, he sells that commercial time and auctions off any unneeded magic items that he encounters. His primary source of income, though, is still his full-time job that he peddles on the side as an Oasis technical support staff under his Bryce Lynch identity. In the next chapter, we find out that Artemis has pulled ahead in the quest for the Jade Key. As usual, my 10-hour shift passed slowly, he writes at the beginning of chapter 21. And when it ended, he logged out of work, immediately logging back into the Oasis. He discovers thousands of new messages, and you could tell just by their subject lines what had happened while he had been at work. Artemis had somehow found the Jade Key. He also talks about magical items that are for sale or that are waiting to be discovered in the Oasis in order to help players advance in the quest. Most of the virtual items in the Oasis were created by the system at random, and they would drop when you killed an NPC or when you completed a quest. The rarest such items were artifacts, super powerful magical items that gave your owners incredible abilities. And since they were so rare, it was always big news when one went up for auction. The record had been set 3 years ago when an artifact called the Cataclysm was auctioned off. Now, the Cataclysm sold to an anonymous bidder for just over 1 million credits, but is an extremely dangerous bomb that kills any player, even the owner of said bomb. It can only be used once, and when detonated, would kill every avatar and non-playable character in the sector. And there was no defense against it. That sets up some heavy foreshadowing. And you know what the results are if you've already seen the film adaptation. But I like the fact that it's established early on in the text version, because when it's used later, you've been waiting for the Cataclysm to come back. And when it does, it makes quite a flourish. Another such artifact is Findoro's Tablet of Finding, and it sells for more than the Cataclysm goes for. According to the auction description, it was a flat circle, polished black stone, and had one simple power. Once a day, its owner could write any avatar's name on its surface, and the tablet would display the avatar's location at that exact moment. So when it went up for auction, the tablet sold for to the Sixers for 2 million credits. And he used, Sorrento used his own account to bid on it and outbid everybody else at the last second. And of course, he uses it to find Artemis. So after she finds the key, Sorrento and the Sixers use it to find her, and they go to Sector 7. But that's as vague as Findoro's Tablet of Finding is. So even Wade notes Sector 7 contained hundreds of planets, moons, and other worlds. And the Jade Key could have been an end of that. But Wade's got a good idea. He says that he goes back to the limerick and says, okay, it's just about trophies. And then thinking about Halliday, he said Halliday won 5 game design trophies, and they were on display inside of the Oasis that called Arcade. Arcade. Could the Jade Key be there? A good, a good idea, a good inspired thought. Wade has, in the downtime when we last saw him, as the tops were, they purchased a ship called the Vonnegut, which is sitting in the runway on his home planet there, his most frequently used spacecraft. It's a heavily modified Firefly class transport vessel modeled after the ship the Serenity in the Firefly TV series. That may be a good potential paper topic for those of you still looking for a reference point or a subject on which to base your analysis. So there you go. He explains about how he had looted the Vonnegut Makadrev over after Klansmen who foolishly attempted to hijack his previous ride, a Star Wars style X-Wing, while he was cruising through a large group of roads in Sector 11, known as the Whedonverse, reference to Firefly creator Josh Whedon. Wade successfully disables their engines and kills every avatar on the ship. The captain had apologized when he noted that he was the great Parzival, but in this instance, there was no forgiveness to forthcoming. He dispatched the crew, parked his X-Wing in the cargo hold, and flew to home in the new ship, the nicknamed the Vonnegut, after the author Kurt Vonnegut of sci-fi classics Slaughterhouse 5 and others. Okay, chapter 22. We've reached the planet Arcade. Arcade stood out from other planets in the area because it was not coded to look realistic. It was home to the Oasis' largest classic video game museum, and its appearance has been designed as a tribute to the vector graphic games of the 70s and 80s. You can see the Def Leppard's Pour Some Sugar on playing as he entered the classical arcade. He freezes in his tracks as he searches through the arcade, finding a recreation of something called Happy Time Pizza, a replica of a small family-run joint that had existed in Halliday's hometown in the 80s. He copied the code from the Middletown simulation and hidden one here inside the arcade museum. So, Wade thinks he's onto something. He finds a Pac-Man game in the arcade, which is out of order. So he asks, why would Halliday have kept such a thing in the simulation? He investigates further, but finds out that the cabinet was, once he moved it away from the wall, it was unplugged. He plugged it back in, and it booted up and seemed to work fine. And he realizes that he would have to play a perfect game of Pac-Man to win this particular little challenge he discovered. He even calls it an Easter egg he discovers, even though it's not the Easter egg of the hunt. Curiously, there's also a quarter that seems to be stuck onto the system itself, and he is trying to get that quarter to unstick, but he can't do it. So he just plays the game. He had a new high score, and he tries after several times, achieves the new high score of 3,333,364. In other words, a perfect game in Pac-Man. The quarter unmagnetizes from the machine and tumbles, falling end over end, landing directly in the palm of his avatar's hand. Interesting. But that's all. Quarter disappears and just reappears in his inventory. So now we travel to planet Frobaz and find the Jade Key. When he leaves Arcade, He returns to his ship and sees an email from H titled Payback. Parzival, you and I are officially even now. You better hurry because the Sixers are probably already on their way there, and he wishes them goodbye. So just as H was able to discern where the copper key was from Parzival, Parzival is able to use the information from H's email to head to the planet Phobos in the same sector and find the jade key. As he writes, there is an attachment included with H's email, and he says that it was a high-resolution scan of the instruction manual for the text adventure game Zork, right? Which was originally played in the TRS-80 Model 3. So Zork, remember, is one of those interactive fiction games. And here's the manual, right? We'll explain how to get around and move through Zork. They used text to create a virtual environment the player inhabited. The game program provided you a simple written description of your surroundings and asked you what you wanted to do next. To move around and interact, you keyed in text commands telling the game what your avatar was supposed to do. You entered a large white house to collect 19 sundry treasures and return them to a trophy case in the living room of this large white house. When all the treasures you collected, you used the magic bosun whistle of the hacker, Captain Crunch, aka John Draper, not to be confused with Don Draper from TV's Mad Men, and you receive a silver key. Well, it's actually the jade key wrapped up in tinfoil. And as Wade explained, it's very similar to a stick of gum or a bar of chocolate. Hence, the reference here to our good friend Willy Wonka. And of course, just as with the copper key before it, the jade key is inscribed with another line. Continue your quest by taking the test. No time to dally though, because as Wade earns the jade key, he heard a muffled roar of approaching spacecraft and knew the Sixers were approaching in force. So here we go. Daito vanishes, chapter 24. Wade keeps a close eye on the scoreboard, waiting to see evidence the Sixers had begun to collect copies of the jade key while their forces held the opposition Gunters at bay. And just as he feared, the next score to increase was the one beside Sorrento's employee number, jumping to 17,000 points, which moved him up into fourth place. However, the next avatar to stag was Shoto, and he did it in less than 20 minutes. He continued to watch the scoreboard, expecting to see his brother Daito's score increase, but that didn't happen. So the question becomes, what did happen to Daito? And Wade explains that Daito must have been killed. Now, as the chaos continues in the planet Phobos, the only thing left for Wade to do is boggle his mind over the location of Jade Key, trying to figure out the quatrain and obtain the key. Seemed to be relatively easy, but he doesn't know what kind of challenge is being alluded to. He asks, could it be the Pepsi challenge? There's a reference to the Cola Wars of the 80s, where Pepsi invented a new, a challenge where they would blind taste test the two beverages to try to win over Coca-Cola's longtime users. And to their surprise, a lot of people ended up choosing Pepsi when they took the blind taste. This led to a whole other creation called Coke 2, also called the New Coke. Coke decided, let's win everybody over. If they think Pepsi is so great, we'll create a new Coke and we'll put it on the market for a while. And of course, as you might have surmised, it ended up tasting a lot like Pepsi. So they had the new Coke recipe out there, and of course, Coke at least claims this was their idea all along. I don't know how much I believe that personally, but they were able to introduce something called classic Coke, which was a return to the regular Coke. Once people had gotten used to missing regular Coke, they were able to rebrand it as classic Coke, and their sales shot up too. So Pepsi created the Pepsi Challenge. Coke created New Coke and Classic Coke in response. And all of this would be, again, a perfect topic for your analysis. Could the test be the Kobayashi Maru? A reference to a famous Star Trek test, which cannot be won. But as he puzzles over this, the IOI team continues to farm out the Jade Keys. To my horror, I saw the Sorrento score had increased by 200,000 points. And now 2 gate icons appeared beside it. He had become the first person to find and clear the second gate. Even though Artemis had found the key first, she still had found the second gate. As a result, his avatar stood in first place at the top of the scoreboard. The Sixer Armada remained on throwbars, and their avatars continued to win copies of the JP. As if that wasn't bad enough, he said, when I was sure things couldn't possibly get worse, they did. They got much, much worse. Because 2 days after he cleared the second gate and completed the Jade Key Challenge, his score jumped up another 40,000 points, indicating he'd acquired the Crystal Key. So now Sorrento has all 3 keys, but he has not yet completed the challenge, nor has he found the Crystal Gate. So there's still a small window of hope for Wade and the other Gunters vying for the Halliday win. And as we close out this chapter, Wade reflects on what he believes to be his lowest ebb. He says that he already lost Artemis, and he was going to lose the contest. He was going to sit up on the arboretum of the roof of his apartment building and breathe deep of the unfiltered city air. Just relaxing, feeling the wind on his skin. Then he'd scale the transparent barrier and hurl himself over the side, thinking about what song he'd like to whistle on his way down. But he's saved by Shoto because he contacts him. And that sets up a whole other host of opportunities, which we'll cover next time. Okay, so we'll stop sharing that and sign off with you all. I hope that this was enlightening and now are ready to approach this week and the writing of this next paper with more confidence and some maybe an ability to think around a corner or think about how to address an issue or problem that you come short with regard to wordplay, or how to think dynamically about a source you use for this. If anything should occur to you that is frightening or that you're not certain of, or you just have a general question, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to me via email. And until then, this is Mr. Fowler signing off, reminding you to keep reading, think critically, and make the best of each day. Take care, everyone.